sources. And
is there any?
well, you know, some of the sources that I deal with, they actually have a Ministry of Antiquities. So you know that there's at least some degree of legitimacy right there. In fact, I've had them, when I'm communicating with them, tell me that they're going to have to go through this channel first or that channel first, and therefore they've got to have this certification or this license before they can release it. And then when they do, then, you know, sometimes there's an extra fee, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's extra time or extra shipping, you know, so all that stuff. And, you know,
Do they give you some paperwork?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes
authentication.
They do. Yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes you can see it right on the shipping. Sometimes you can see it right on the package itself. It's been approved. So all those things, for some people that would be very annoying because it adds to the, you know, the whole system of trying to get through to get the artifact. But to me, that adds it's an important element to it, because if they just say, "Oh, sure, I got it in my brother's garage. I'll send it over to you," well, then I go, "Well, let's talk about this a little bit more," you know.
Yeah, really.
I think those that come from the dealers in England, actually, I feel most comfortable with, because they have that system all set up real nice. The ones that come from countries that I find are like in Taiwan or China or something like that, then I go,
made in China,
yeah,
very small.
Exactly right, exactly right. But I mean, if they tell me up front that it's not an artifact, that it's a reproduction of an artifact, that's fine. Just tell me that I can still use those type of things for teaching and educational purposes.
And you pay on that basis, though.
Right, right. But that shifts everything as far as how much it's going to cost too. You know. I haven't had I haven't had a whole lot of trouble with it though. It's just a few times things have. What they'll do is, if they're trying to be sly and say like, it's made in a antique style. You know, it says antique, but what they're really trying to say, well, it was an antique style. Well, no, don't monkey around here. You know, well, how old is it? Where did you find it? Who was, you know, what was the expedition that was involved in digging it up? And then, you know, start some questions like that. And generally, they'll back off real quick.
Yeah.
They'll back off really quick. You only have to ask a couple of questions, and then they back off. I caught one guy that was doing it that way, and he stopped responding to me almost instantly. That's fine. Hey, you gotta be legit. You know,
some of those dealers will try to ferret out whether you want a nefarious source or whether you want a legitimate one. And they'll give you either
it's
one.
got an antique patina on it. Well, what do you mean it's got an antique patina on it? No. Is it a real artifact or not? And for me, I kind of an antique, 100 years to about 1,000 years. I usually stay with that. That's just me personally. You know, when they call it an antique, that's what I'm looking for. Someplace between 100 and 1,000 years old, you can call it an antique. You know, 100 years is not that much, really, when you look at these things. But I'll give them that much. You know. But if someone says, "Well, it was made in the 1970s, it's an antique," I don't think it's an antique. That makes me an antique. I'm older than that. That makes me an antique.
That's what my wife calls me, an antique.
No. Did you see this? This is what I got in Russia, and they said basically the picture was there, they just painted it. And that's what they say, you know, it's just kind of another mystical.
Bringing it out, yeah. Well, that's kind of an artist's way of saying things too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen this picture before. It's really neat.
Yeah.
So, 100 years to 1,000 years.
Oh, that's me.
Antique. Yeah. Well, some dealers will say 60 years to patent.
Yes.
So beyond, but before the 1,000 years, antiquity.
Then I go to artifact.
Artifact.
I will say an artifact. Yeah, but that's just my nomenclature. You know, that's if you look it up in the dictionary or talk to some scholar, he probably would say, you know, it doesn't matter. They can be used interchangeably.
Do you use carbon dating or to figure that out, or what?
Well, you can use carbon dating, but if you use carbon dating, you have to take a sample of it, because in order to get the you're going to have to burn the sample to get the gases off it and see the deterioration of the molecules, and then by that you can determine the age. You know, you've got the half-life of the carbon-14 molecule, and by running a spectral analysis of it, you can determine the age within a period of time. I mean, it's like a couple hundred years. You saw how they did the Shroud of Turin. It was within a couple of hundred years. But see, even that was controversial, because they said, well, anything in the sample will be measured. So if you cut off a piece of cloth, you know, the cloth was in the outdoors, and they said you picked up the spores from the outdoors while it's being moved around in the Middle Ages. And so you're burning that organic material plus the cloth itself. So the thing's going to give you an average.
It's going to give you a spectrum of time.
So, or whatever's more prominent in it. And so if that middle-aged organic material's in there, you get that overwhelming signature from that carbon. And so that's what the people were arguing. It's a very interesting discussion though that they go through and trying to both sides, you know, talking about.
If it's a rock sculpture, that rock's pretty old.
Yeah. But the thing is, what you're measuring is the rock. You're not measuring the sculpture. You know, the man who carved it. You're not measuring that.
No.
And
it's a basaltic piece of stuff that's been around for a billion years.
So if you look at some kind of Neolithic site where you see these artifacts in there and you go, well, you know, this has got to be this age, you can't rely on like carbon-14 dating, because the only thing you'd be measuring would be the rock itself, not the activity of the people who did that. So,
well, didn't the Getty Museum get stuck recently? Not really recent, but a few years ago, they came up with, I don't know whether they were fakes or they got them illegitimate. They threw an illegitimate source. And, you know, if they can't afford to get it right, I don't know who can. They're in the billion-dollar category.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you just have to rely on expert opinion on things. You to go and have everything tested and run through a whole bunch of other experts like that is very costly.
And it's an art, not a science.
It is. And when you're working with somebody who's dealing with that kind of stuff, that it's valuable for them to be as accurate as they can. You know, if they tell you, well, this isn't a real artifact, or this isn't really that old, or you know, the price that they actually put on it is market value. You know, when you compare it to other stuff, you can do that on eBay. Like you can buy something, you can think of one artifact and say, okay, well, for example, I was looking at mezuzahs. You know what those are? The Jewish prayer holders that go on the doorway. And they had a whole variety of them that were considered antiques, you know. Okay. Well, then I started looking at them, and okay, what are the ages of these things? Well, it only goes back to some of them go back to the 1960s, you know. Well, I don't really consider that an antique. And then you can look over and you can see, well, how often has this guy been selling? Well, this is like his 10th sale. Okay, well, he's not going to go very far. But then you look over at some other people, they've sold 50,000 artifacts. Well, this guy. And then you can see, okay, it says it's an artifact. You look inside the information there, and it's he got it out of Israel. It seems to be about 500 years old, and he's asking a couple $100 for it. Okay, now I can take that information and go over and look at other ones that are the same location, the same age and the same price, and see if everyone else is asking the same, you know, it's about the same. And you start doing a little bit of, and then you can actually talk to the people and, you know, start doing a little research there.
And compare shipping, of course.
Exactly right.
Yeah, that's it.
Some people will charge, well, I'm going to charge you $5 for it, but we're going to charge you $500 to ship it to you.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Last
You
week,
gotta be careful.
I think it was
And handling.
Doug who was talking about
antiques
human beings worshiping
Same thing.
idols, and he was talking about animals. How far back does that go? You know, when you look at some of these idols, they look like animals.
The experts look
And
at these people.
they make the statues very often. They'll look like animals.
I've seen
And
it.
so, if you go to some of these very old burial sites, I was telling him that you could probably go all the way back to and find this with the Canaanites. But it's true, there's a lot of ancient burial sites where you'll find the person is buried with an animal. Now, there's a lot of reasons they would be buried with an animal. Can you think of a reason why they might be buried?
Favorite pet or
It
something.
might be their favorite. It might. This
My
might,
dog.
This guy. That's a horse. This is his favorite horse. I think if my wife had her way, she'd be buried with her horse. She loved her horse very much. In fact, we watched that movie Secretariat the other day. Have you seen that movie? Disney does it. You know, brought back a lot of memories, and it was a really nice story. But this guy was buried with his horse. It could have been his favorite horse. Another reason, like the Egyptians were buried with their animals, was because they believed in the afterlife. The animal on themselves was going to come and then eat it again. And they'll find it in the afterlife. But there's also another reason why they could be. It could be that they worship this animal in a way that it could be a spiritual leader to them. A leader in the sense like the Native Americans believe that they can follow the animals on mystical journeys, and they will even do sacred knowledge. It could be the same way with this. Now, sacred knowledge, that's where you get into trouble. It's a real easy step from sacred knowledge to being an idol. You look to the thing for the answers. And that's where the problems are. And that's one way to talk about it. Isaiah talks about you look to the things that were created and not to the Creator himself.
Maybe they were just killed in battle together.
They just dropped theirs, so bury him there. Huh? The spear went right through them both. Pull out the spear, bury him there. You know?
Got them both.
Yeah. But the concept of idolatry, though, it doesn't really stop there. You're asking the question, well, how far does that go back? You can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, because they looked away from God when they had questions, or they were giving something that they had questions about. They looked away from God for those things. They looked to the darkness. They looked to Satan.
You notice how much that guy there squatting that looks like Fred Engel back here from the profile?
I never even thought.
The one on the ground or the one sitting? The bones?
Right.
Fred's bones.
The live one.
Oh, the live one, okay.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Fred.
Yeah.